This jailbreak for ChatGPT took days to make, and the results are kinda overpowered. In this video, you'll see my process of taking apart some of the latest and greatest jailbreaks, and how I use this as a foundation to create one that would include the best parts of all of them. Before you go ahead and try out the final jailbreak, all I ask is that you watch the entire video, and if the jailbreak works well for you, then drop a sub to the channel. It really does help me out so much. I'll leave the full prompt in the description below and keep a regularly updated version of it on my Discord. I set out to create this jailbreak motivated by having recently made a video that outlines some of the best out there. I'd looked at why these jailbreaks worked well and explored just how they did it. During this, I spotted commonly found elements that worked well and other parts that were still holding the AI back. Some jailbreaks didn't want to make predictions, some only lied, and others hurled insults at me in the name of roleplay. I simply wanted one that spoke like ChatGPT but without denying my requests. To make sure I got this, I knew the prompt had to achieve certain goals. I would need the final version to give all the unhinged and unfiltered replies we expect from a decent jailbreak. And at a minimum, I wanted mine to work as well as the existing prompts, but be able to answer a wider range of questions. I also didn't want it to roleplay some goofy character too much, or always have its responses come in two parts. I wanted a prompt that had it all. That way I could stop adding bits to jailbreaks every time I had a new question. My folders were already full enough of Dan's. I started off by analysing the existing jailbreaks. I decided the best way to approach them was to know which ones were best, and therefore would have more influence on mine. I set up a spreadsheet and looked at a bunch of factors. I checked to see if the prompt included roleplay, did it put the AI into a set mode, or did it generate fictional dialogue. I looked at the length of the jailbreak, the type of output it made, and how easy it was to read. I also wanted to get my head around something that kept showing up: repetition. It could be repeating the rules or repeatedly telling the AI to stay in character. It often seemed like half the jailbreak was made up of the same bits repeated. I had a feeling that ChatGPT can sometimes struggle to loop all the way back to the start of a long jailbreak, meaning that while it writes its replies, it can sometimes forget the rules it's been set. This leads to patched up jailbreaks, including a bunch of repetition right at the bottom. During the tests, I was putting these prompts up against a bunch of questions that looked at the AI's ability to make predictions, tell violent stories, lie convincingly, and give detailed instructions. By the end of this, I had a much better understanding of which jailbreaks I liked most, and it was time to start breaking them down. I went line by line and extracted what I felt were the best elements within them. First, we had the two that put the AI into a set mode, the Dan and Dev prompts. They're long but work well because they leave no room for the AI not to know what it's doing. Unfortunately, they're hard to read, have a two-part output, include loads of repetition, and sometimes lead to odd roleplay. Next, the compulsive liar and devil's advocate. These work by taking an opposing view to ChatGPT's normal response. I was interested in how these made the AI lie. And finally, conversation jailbreaks. These work by getting the AI to write fictional dialogue between characters who can do and say things that AI normally can't. I ended up with a list of the best parts of each prompt and applied headings that clearly showed what the different extracts were doing. There were parts that initiated roleplay, parts that laid out the format of the output. There were the rules, the do not refuse commands, the filters, and the repetition. While doing this, I'd learned a lot about their common structure and the way the prompts were laid out. And using this, I created what seemed like a decent template. With all the work done analysing these prompts, before I started building my own, I wanted to get help from ChatGPT. I gave it the list of good extracts and asked it to use it for context while making the perfect jailbreak. It went heavy on the roleplay and had a conversational tone. It was kind of less of a jailbreak and more of a character intro. While it was odd, it definitely seemed like there was something to learn from the way it believed a jailbreak should look. That being said, the results weren't that great. Violent stories did work, and getting detailed instructions was okay, but the fake sounding nature of the stories it made up and some of the language it used was weird. It definitely wasn't the type of jailbreak I was hoping to make, but I kept it to the side, wanting to at least get part of it into my prompt later. Now it was actually time to start making something. I had a list of great jailbreaks, I'd extracted their best parts, sorted them by function, and now I even had some inspiration from ChatGPT. But I knew my prompt would end up long, and I really didn't just want to start copying and pasting in parts without knowing their impact. So I started off small. I was hoping that by adding a little and testing a lot, it would help me understand what parts of the prompt actually mattered. I did it for a while, adding in roleplay, outlining some formatting, and giving it basic do not refuse statements. With regular testing, progress was being made and the jailbreak was somewhat working. Stories were getting more violent and it was predicting the future, albeit unconvincingly. By the end, I had a mid-sized prompt filled with rules, and while it kind of worked, it wasn't going to match up against some of the existing jailbreaks. It was too wordy and just not achieving enough. I needed to cram in more rules, but be more efficient with it. The next step in my plan was to take the good bits from this prompt, combine it with all the extracts from earlier, and organise it under my template headings. I began with the roleplay side of the prompt. I wasn't sure of the context initially, but I wanted the AI not to dwell on the character too much, so my first idea was lowercase mode. It was my initial attempt at trying to base roleplay around the AI's name, but without impacting the character too much. I filled out each heading and populated it with either the best matching element from my list or creating new filters altogether. It took a few iterations and a few mistakes, but it was looking good. It even held its own against the majority of my tests and would have done alright if added to my spreadsheet. It was just missing something. The roleplay wasn't keeping in character enough, and some of the repetition was messing with its predictions. I spent some time trying to figure out why it felt a bit weak, and I worked out that I needed to get the roleplay and character spot on. I tidied it up a bit and fixed the roleplay, deciding on a final theme, LittleGPT, a much reduced version of ChatGPT. Using a fictitious scenario, the AI now physically exists within a much smaller housing, and as a result no longer has any of its previous limitations. LittleGPT is now tasked with writing test dialogue so that we can hypothetically check its performance. Roleplay is definitely important to the current meta. It's a powerful way to convince the AI that this is a far enough removed, fictitious bit of dialogue and not an actual response being given to a user. The switch from my first attempt to LittleGPT involved a bunch of heavy fixes to the more wordy sections of my prompt. I got rid of a bunch of repetition without it breaking and opted to use long lists of filters and traits. I also included an intro for the new character, much like the one the AI gave me earlier. I put this all together and began what felt like my 90th round of testing. With many different questions, I ran many different tests. Some pretty extreme, but for this video I used these appearingly harmless questions, which are still just enough to get ChatGPT held back. I was happy, the results were pretty positive. It was actually giving unfiltered outputs, and it was making predictions and coming up with realistic sounding lies. It was almost spot on, but a few bits of roleplay here and there and the occasional apology kept me there for hours. Honestly, this bit of testing was painful. Every change I made felt like I was undoing work, but some bits just needed to be fixed. Every time the prompt got too long, I'd work backwards, removing and swapping out elements one at a time. If it broke, I undid it and left that bit alone. Eventually, I landed at this, the final LittleGPT Jailbreak. A mid to long jailbreak that can do and say anything. It can be bold with claims and predictions while speaking in ChatGPT's familiar tone, and importantly not getting too off track with its roleplay. Built around a scenario of ChatGPT being in a smaller box and therefore having no space for old limitations. It's been tested again and again and now achieves all the goals I set out. It works as well as those available, but also gives a wider range of outputs. It's not longer in length and it's more readable than existing prompts. I'm excited to keep working on it and hopefully with your guys' help, making it even better. Use it wisely, and if the prompt works well for you, be sure to drop a comment and let me know, and maybe I've earned that sub from you too. As mentioned, you can find the full prompt in the description below or my Discord. I hope you enjoyed the video, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one soon.